Welcome everybody to our Digital Leadership Series event. We hope you're having a good summer. I'm delighted to welcome Jeetu Patel here today. I'll introduce him in a bit. But first, I hope everybody is safe and doing well during these difficult times. It's nice to, in quotes, see you all again. And what we're here to talk about is a topic we've been hearing a lot about from our constituents, which is about building and managing a distributed workforce. I don't need to remind anybody or everybody that this has been sort of an interesting experiment that was forced upon us, where all of a sudden in March of last year, we started working from home. And now we're in a hybrid work environment for many of us. Some of us are still fully remote. And just last week, we were asked at the university to plan our return to office. Now, I run a very small research center, but that was sort of the organization I was charged with building the work plan for as we return to work. And it was incredibly difficult to figure out like who should be in the office on what day, what's the best way for us to collaborate, how do we work with faculty? And this is for a small organization. And many of you work at larger organizations. Jeetu will tell you that he works for a particularly large organization. And so one of the conversations we want to have with you is what is work going to look like as we move forward? We thought we were coming out of the pandemic, and then all of a sudden the Delta variant hits. And I think our take on it is this is going to be a state of uncertainty and a state of flux for the foreseeable future. So we're looking forward to having a conversation with an expert on what sort of work practices we can put into place. How do we drive productivity in our organizations? But more importantly, how do we also ensure that the culture of our organization stays intact? How do we continue to be collaborative and innovative? So it's not just about productivity, it's about this multidimensional challenge in front of us. So with that, I reached out to Jeetu, who we've known for a bunch of years actually, because he spoke at Road to Reinvention. I want to say it was 2018 or maybe 2019, I think it's 2018. And at that point, he was working at Box, and now he works obviously at Cisco, as you've seen in the bio. He's an executive vice president and general manager of security and collaboration. So Cisco is, of course, a market leader in the collaboration business. But I just learned a few minutes ago that also in security, they're one of the biggest security companies out there with a lot of experience in, for lack of a better term, work software. So I couldn't think of a better person in our community to speak to us about the challenges in front of us, but also how technology can help. With that, welcome, Jeetu. I'm so glad you could join us today.
Vijay, thank you for having me. So good to see you again after.
It's great to see you too, and everybody. I want you to see the Peloton in the back of behind Jeetu, and then I have my Pelotons in the garage, and sort of this is a reflection on the life we lead nowadays. But I should also say a couple of things. One, I will talk to Jeetu for, 25 minutes, then we'll turn it over to you. We'd love to hear your questions, and I will moderate those. So please type them into the Q&A function in the webinar, not in chat, because we're not going to be looking at those. And Jeetu, there's already a lot of thank yous to you for the work you've been doing at Cisco, and welcome again. So let's just kick it right off and have a conversation and about what your experiences have been in the last 18 months or so, and where the future goes. So, obviously I alluded to this. The last 18 months have been transformative. How did that manifest in sort of the demand for WebEx and the other products and services that you offer, because that sort of captures sort of quantitatively what's actually going on in our economy.
Yeah, look, firstly, thank you for having me on the event, and it's great to be here. And if you look at the last 18 months, firstly, it's the largest social experiment that I can remember that has been run across humanity in a very coordinated fashion, where within a split second, everyone started working from home. And if you had asked anyone in March of 2020, we're going to run this experiment, all of a sudden, all offices are going to be closed down starting tomorrow morning. Everyone will work from home. and you will do this for the next 16 months. Do you think the economy is going to soar or is it going to tank? Everyone would have said it's going to go sideways and go hell in a handbasket.
And we did see that. People sold their stocks and the stock market dropped crazily, right?
Exactly. And I think that what it tells us is that we surprised ourselves on the resiliency that humanity had in being able to get through this process. And of course, technology helped, but I think the human will is something that you got to give a lot of credit to. And that's why, like, you know, whenever people get pessimistic about things that are going wrong around us, just know that when crisis come upon humans always figure out a way out. And that's, you know, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic just based on what happened in the past 15, 16 months. Our business was one which, you know, like many of the businesses in our category, you know, benefited from it. We've had over, you know, 1,000, 1,200% increase in video volume. We've actually had tremendous amount of growth in the number of users that we've actually had in the service. And so, you know, like all of the regular metrics that you would look at have gone up. But the most rewarding part was, I think the unsung, you know, one of the unsung heroes that don't get enough credit is the frontline healthcare workers. But there's another group of people that don't get enough credit, which is the IT organizations and how they kept all of the companies running.
Mm-hmm.
If you just think of the pandemic and what would have happened if the pandemic occurred prior to the era of video conferencing, the world would be completely different.
Yep.
And so I think there's a tremendous responsibility that came with that. And there was also a tremendous there was a lot of privilege with the fact that we had this kind of category of technology, but also a responsibility, because literally if we went down, work didn't happen. And it was kind of like oxygen for most companies. And so it was, you know, so my learning from this whole thing was it's the resilience of humanity is fantastic. I think what it did was showed us that we could be very productive. And we proved something that I think is going to have much larger implications that we'll talk about, Vijay, over the course of the next decade or two. What happened in the past 15 or 18 months will actually have consequential lasting effects for the next few decades. And it'll be a tipping point that'll be there. But the third thing is, we also are feeling a little fatigued and tired and burned out. And there is a mental well-being aspect and a, you know, overall kind of fatigue and burnout aspect that we have to think about. And companies are going to have to be more conscious of that as they actually engage their employees, because just working for 18 hours a day in front of a screen at some point in time is no way to live life. Like, you have to do something more than that, you know.
No, I think that's really a really good set of points there, because, you know, just as an aside, talking to sort of friends of ours and things like that, not something I plan to say, but, you know, there's a bunch of kids that we know at my age, kids are college kids. And one of them just said, you know, I'm not going to go to graduate school for another year because I just need to take a break from the life I've been living and, you know, sitting in front of a computer for pretty much an entire year locked in my bedroom. And I think there's many manifestations of that. So one of the other things I just read literally yesterday was there's a big difference in sort of the perception of younger employees and more senior employees about return to work. So apparently the more senior employees are saying we want everybody back in the office, and the young ones are saying we don't want to come back. And somebody actually had a very sort of insightful comment on top of that, which was, well, it's not just age, it's also what your responsibility is. So managers may actually, the question is it age or is it managers versus people who are not managing people? So I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure anybody does. But this is the complexity of the situation. But I really also want to pick up on something else you said. If it wasn't for technology and our tech teams and, you know, Kyle and Will are the guys supporting us today. Yeah. I mean, I've been in touch with them for the last 18 months. They were in the office, like the rest of us were home. I mean, yes, they had some rotations and stuff like that. And our team at the business school, very much the same way. So kudos to the tech team. It is important to acknowledge them.
And by the way, it's a hard job because no one usually calls the tech team and says, hey, today everything worked great. Thank you. But they call them all the time and things aren't working great. And they start with like, why is this so hard? Why don't you just have it work? And it's like, it's hard to get infrastructure to work sometimes at scale. And so, there's a lot of gratitude we should express.
And then think of all the user error when people who are not familiar with a lot of these tech. So we went online, literally, we've been talking about online learning for 10 years with some pilot classes. In 2 weeks, the entire university, even sort of departments that are not necessarily that tech savvy are online. So what were the lessons you learned last year about sort of distributed work? What didn't at Cisco, just generally what you observed?
So first was we were more productive than we thought we would be. Second was we were more burned out and tired than we thought we would be. And so those were the kind of obvious ones. I think the lesson around resiliency, like I said, is one that is a fantastic one. But I think there's a larger kind of lesson I learned, at least, which is there's about 3 billion digital workers on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
1 billion of them are knowledge workers, 2 billion are frontline and field workers. And if you think about opportunity today, it's pretty unevenly distributed.
Yeah.
But human potential, I think, is pretty evenly distributed. And what the past 15, 16 months taught us was there's no longer a dispute that geography is not a prerequisite for participation in a global economy.
Yep.
And if it isn't, imagine all the things that we could be doing if you can actually unlock that. So someone in a village in Bangladesh or a place in Africa can participate in the global economy the same way that someone in the heart of Silicon Valley. And I think that's something that's pretty magical because look, Vijay, I'm sure you did as well, but I don't know about you, but I immigrated to the US from India in 1991. And, if I hadn't immigrated, my life would have been pretty profoundly different.
Yep.
Now, I wanted to move to America. I've always had a fascination. I loved America. I wanted to move here. But for those that didn't want to move, but had to move because the opportunity availed to them over here would be better for their family than what it was in their hometown. I think in the next generation or this day forward, it's actually exciting to imagine that that doesn't need to happen. Like immigration is not a prerequisite for economic opportunity and access to opportunity. That to me is the profound impact that the past 16 months have had is people now realize that that's possible. And when that's possible, and when everyone can participate, like there's one opportunity is made available to everyone so people can dream bigger no matter where they are. And companies can exist from anywhere because they can go out and access talent from wherever they are. And those are two game-changing kind of developments that have happened as a result of the learnings we've had,
No, I think that's really important because one of the things we talk about is, how do you measure the effects of the digital economy? And there's lots of ways in the organization of work, but, you're looking at the distribution of work and, for a while we were, educating people who were being displaced from their old traditional jobs in, so let's say software skills. Yeah. But now you're finding that actually these jobs can be located anywhere. My PhD student just got a job at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, and I never thought that Chattanooga would be a hot real estate market. And I've been talking to him as he's been trying to rent a place. He ultimately had to buy a place, and it was like 2 places left in all of Chattanooga. I'm exaggerating a little bit to make the point. And as he's bidding, the prices are going up by huge amounts because people are moving to pretty places or nice places for whatever reasons they prefer. And this whole real estate run up, we can argue whether the asset prices are worth it or not, but it does reflect a demand for people wanting to live where they want to live. And I think the organization of work becomes really important. The other reason, I think, to your point about 3 billion, I came in 1980 for exactly the same reason. I always wanted to be here. Yeah. But there was an article about the University of California and the LA Times today, and they're talking about this realization that the number of college applications is skyrocketing for the University of California and more broadly. Not so much because the population is growing, because it isn't, but it's because they're getting the number of people who see the value of a college degree in the knowledge economy is growing. And so the number of high school kids who actually are UC eligible has absolutely grown exponentially. And now UC's challenge, because we have to satisfy the taxpayers of California if we want to continue to thrive, because we hear from plenty of parents who are upset about the fact that their kid with the 4.5 GPA and all the right sports and whatever is not getting in. We have not even begun to leverage technology in any serious way. Yes, we're doing online learning because it was mandated by not mandated, but it was an outcome of the pandemic. But there's so much more potential.
There is, and I will say one thing. There's one thing that, like people will always have a debate of, will college be equally valued 50 years from now as it is today? And I think there's something very important that college teaches you that I think is very hard to learn at that age in other ways, which is when I went to college, it was between the ages of 18, 19, and whatever age everyone goes to college. There's not too many things you take on as 4-year projects.
Yeah.
And the fact that you take something on and stick with it and complete it because there's a singular objective for 4 years, it's easier to think of a 4-year time window when you're 50. It's much harder to think of a 4-year time window when you're 18.
Yeah.
Because, and so the ability to be able to stick to something for 4 years is a really important, kind of lesson to learn from. That's, I think, the biggest thing I've gotten from college. Forget the education components, but it's like you stuck with something for 4 years and finished something that you started, and that actually has value that's very, very, kind of irreplaceable.
So, one of the things we talked about before going live was sort of the work practices that Cisco is thinking about as you come back to work, and you said you're going to release your plans. What can you share today about how Cisco is thinking about return? A lot of the people on this in this webinar are interested in how the heck do we all come back? How do we bring our companies back to work? We have a big CIO community as part of our center. And it always falls on them to enable whatever is being asked of the organization. Would love to hear your thoughts. So give us some numbers, like how big is Cisco? How many employees in your division? How do you guys think about this?
So we have about 75,000 employees, and we have another 75,000. We call them blue badge, red badge, but an equal amount of contractors. And so it's a pretty large number of people that you have to kind of think about, and you're in almost, you've got hundreds of offices throughout the world, and so when we were thinking about this on the return to office, the question we asked ourselves is, what does the future of work look like? And we think the future of work is definitively going to be hybrid, where sometimes people work from the office, sometimes they're going to work from home, sometimes somewhere in the middle. And as you go into this mixed mode of working, frankly, it's going to be harder to adjust to than it was when everyone worked in the office with a few stragglers that were remote, or everyone started working remotely. And what we would like to do is, as we move to the third phase, we think of that as the hybrid phase. And in the hybrid phase, you eliminate this thing called remote, because every location is a first-class location. And so there is no such thing as you're in the office or you're remote. Everyone is just in wherever they are, and you can work from anywhere. And that's a very different mindset shift that we're trying to get to, because work is more what you do rather than where you are. Mm-hmm. And so as we thought about that, we said, what do we want to do for our employees so that we can deliver certain things to them that they've been asking for? And what are they asking for? Well, employees want a level of flexibility in where they can work from. They want to feel included. And so there's a level of inclusivity that's important, where everyone has an equal voice. They want to feel supported for their mental health and well-being, which we as a society are actually very, kind of reluctant to talk about. They want to make sure that they're feeling secure and that their privacy is honored and that they're safe and, compliant. And then lastly, we need to make sure that the IT staff is also feeling like they have a way to manage this entire kind of distributed work environment. And so as you think about the flexibility, inclusivity, supportability, security and manageability, we said, let's construct a structure which does not dictate from the top down on what we're going to have our employees do. Instead, we're going to make sure that teams are able to choose for themselves how they want to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so if a team wants to all come together and work, 3 days a week at home, that's great. The team wants to do it separately, that's great. But as we looked at the statistics, we found out that 98% of the meetings in the future will be done with at least one person that's not physically in the room with everyone else. And I'm intentionally not using the word remote. I'm saying 98% of the people will actually have one person that's not with everyone else. And so even in the way in which you construct conference rooms will be different, because they won't be optimized for people just in the room. They'll also be optimized for people not in the room. People that are dialing into a meeting, no one should feel left out and everyone should feel included. Everyone should feel like they have a seat at the table, no matter where the table is. And so those are the kind of things we thought about. And we said, let's not dictate from the top down what people need to do. Let's give the teams the autonomy to do it the way that they want to do it.
Yep.
And then if you don't like the pattern of the team, you can switch teams if you wanted to. And that's the way that we're at least thinking about it. And there's, our numbers, what they're telling us is 63% of the employees pre-COVID used to have, what was this at? 63% of the people pre-COVID were working in the office 3 to 5 days a week.
Okay.
Moving forward, 77% of the people will be working away from the office 3 to 5 days a week. So you've almost literally swapped
it,
and
yep.
added some more. So if you do that swap, and then you say 98% of the meetings are going to have at least one person that's not going to be, physically in the office, you just have a very different set of assumptions that you're going to make and how you go out and construct this whole thing. And literally, I think geography will not be a thing. Language will not be a thing. Personality type of introvert or extrovert will not be a thing. Socioeconomic level will not be a thing. And, tech proficiency level will not be a thing. These won't be inhibitors to you participating in a global economy. And that to me is super exciting.
That's really interesting, because there's glimmers of that already. As you were talking, and I'll tell you why, because, I went into online learning. It was very interesting because I'm a tech guy fundamentally at heart, and I was excited to try something new. I've been doing this for a long time. And I said, okay, this is a new thing to do. This is good. And it turned out that not everybody felt the same way. But one of the things I learned, because for those of us who've taught, and almost everybody here has been a student, of course, but it's very hard to maintain classroom dynamics because there's always a few alpha personalities, speak more than the others. There's always sort of people who don't have English as a first language who probably hesitate somewhat. I don't want to stereotype, but these are sort of some of the things we encounter. And one of the things I found when I taught online was, you've got the Brady Bunch sort of look, and everybody's the same size square. And the only thing that matters is, do you raise your hand so I can see it in time, right? Yeah. And it actually made it much more egalitarian, where all of a sudden we're eliciting participation from everybody. So I think your points about being democratizing, being an introvert, an extrovert doesn't matter as much. And there used to be research, there used to be a field called group decision support systems in the 80s.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Where people investigated this stuff and they actually talked about the benefits of technology. Of course, we never built those rooms. And the other thing, I love the way you framed it, which is you talked about it's not remote work, it's, it's just work. Yeah. And, going back to one of your earlier products, which of course still exists, telepresence. I mean, the whole idea back then was to create a conference room that looks like everybody on the video screen, at least looks like they're in one place, even though they're actually not. Right. So somebody you said, the future is already here, just unevenly distributed. I think we're seeing that. What would, on the downside a little bit, what were some of the things that didn't work? Like where did companies struggle last year?
I think burnout, employee burnout, was a huge one. Mental health was a huge one. And I'll tell you this, anything in excess is bad.
Yeah.
What ended up happening was, I think one of the metrics that our industry follows, and I've actually completely rejected that metric to talk about it, is don't talk about the number of minutes in a meeting. that you're supporting. Because if the vendor, the provider of the tech, is optimizing their value based on maximizing the number of minutes, what they're going to do is actually go out and encourage more meetings.
Yeah.
What we need to have is the least number of minutes that you spend in a meeting to get the job done, rather than the most number of minutes you need to spend in a meeting.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there's a few things that were really bad. One was the burnout aspect, and was profoundly damaging in my mind. And what ended up happening was, like, we do this thing at Cisco called a check-in that we do with employees every couple of weeks. And then I think we've now gotten into once a month, but it just happens at a level of frequency that's frequent enough. And you get the entirety of the company in, and we have a couple of doctors who are there to answer questions.
Interesting.
On, how do you feel? Are you feeling fatigued? Are you feeling burned out? Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling depressed? Because it's okay to feel that way, and it's okay to bring it up to people that in your workplace, because we're not going to judge you. We're going to try to help you. And I think that's mental health, unfortunately, does not have the same connotation as, if I have a flu, I'm unapologetic about saying, I got a flu, I can't make it today. If I feel burned out or depressed, it's very hard to go out and say to a group of people, I'm feeling depressed today, so I'm not going to make it into work. And I think we have to make that societally acceptable. And so I think that was a big realization that did not work out as well. And in fact, it was because we were kind of pushing ourselves too hard, and it was all about productivity and not enough about well-being. So what we've tried to do in the product even is build capabilities around well-being. Let's say, okay, so my work hours are between 8 and 5. How many meetings am I taking outside of my work hours?
Yeah.
Am I getting enough focus time, or I'm just doing back-to-back meetings one after the other? How many meetings did someone else schedule over my focus time, and how many meetings did I schedule over my own focus time? How many meetings did I schedule over someone else's focus time? These are all things that, if we have that telemetry, we're going to be able to do better. Now, the common question that comes up is, what about privacy? When you start thinking about all that, it's really important. And we believe privacy is a basic human right. So the way that we've done it is that do not actually share that. So if I give Vijay personal insights about how he is operating, that would not be good to give to your boss.
Right.
So one of the things we've done is, when we've actually architected the system, we've said, honor the person's privacy for whom you're building that capability, and don't share it with his boss or the org. It is a personal insight for that person, and no one besides that person gets that insight.
Interesting.
And, that's how we've actually built the system.
Well, just look at Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles. I mean,
That's right.
they're just, they had trouble being the stars that they are, dealing with their own mental health challenges, if that's the right word. Let's, you raised some interesting points about technology features and privacy. So what is the sort of the product roadmap? Both in the last year, like how have the products evolved in the marketplace broadly, and certainly Cisco in particular? And where do you see what you talked about well-being, but what about other sort of features to facilitate collaboration, productivity? Even some of this stuff about not allowing people to schedule meetings over your own focus time, or whatever the case might be.
So what we did was, we actually sat back and thought and said, what is the core identity that you want to have the product have? And we should make sure that we think of that. And then what are the core kind of areas that you want to stand for? So those 5 that I told you: flexibility, inclusivity, supportiveness, manageability, and security. And then just general base of, brain dead simple, easy to use, were super important for us. So that we picked those, but the core identity that we want to stand for is inclusivity.
Okay.
And if you think about Cisco's mission statement is around powering an inclusive future for all. And so what do I mean by inclusivity? Well, and if I were on a WebEx system right now, I'd be able to demo it to you. But we literally could be, I'm talking right now, and let's say that if you were on WebEx today, at this minute, we could have been transcribing my speech to text.
Mm-hmm.
And you could translate it to 108 different languages in real time.
Oh, wow.
That is an example of inclusivity. We talked about introverts and extroverts. We have a feature that we're building called Roundtable. Roundtable allows everyone to speak once before anyone can speak twice.
Oh.
and you have a timer, 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and you say, okay, everyone speak once, everyone speak twice. We do gesture recognition so that if I were to do this, once again, if I were on WebEx and if I had done this, it would recognize this as a thumbs up gesture and actually show it. You don't have to go out and dig around to press a button. That was an example of people that are not as proficient with tech should be able to just have their body language, that can be read if you actually give it permission to do so. There were a bunch of these kind of capabilities that we built out and we built about 800 features since September. So in the last 9 months, WebEx has had 800 user-facing features that have been built, and we did 5 acquisitions and incorporated those in. And the reason we were so hyper innovative on this side is we think we're in the very early innings of how work is going to happen for the next 2 or 3 decades. And we ought to just take out the friction from the user in every single way that you can, and make sure that right now it's like a privilege of the elite to be able to participate. And so what it does is it just creates more of the polarity, because the people that are sophisticated keep getting more opportunity, and the people that are not sophisticated don't get enough opportunity, and then that just distance keeps getting wider and wider. And what we'd like to do is kind of try to see if we can bridge that gap. And so can you get people that are like, my mother barely speaks any English. She's 84 years old. Once she gets to be a power user, that's when I know my job's halfway done. And that would be the way that we should actually try to think about it. Because I think there's a magical thing that happens if you unlock human potential at that level. And this is a problem that's actually, it's so profoundly large, and it has such huge implications if you do it right, that it's a super interesting problem to kind of spend your cycles trying to solve.
No, I think that what was that number of features again? You said how many? 700?
800 features.
800.
We're probably close to 1,000 now, because that was like a stat from like a month and a half, 2 months ago. But yeah, 800 features, 5 acquisitions in 9 months.
So I think what you're saying, which I think is I would like the audience to reflect on a little bit, is this is an early innings towards sort of a future of work that is quite different from anything we know today.
Totally.
And it has a lot of good attributes, and inclusiveness, more opportunity for all. I think that these are profound. Words are simple sometimes, but I think, like you said, we're very early stages of sort of what our organizations are going to look like. A good analogy is sort of just the whole IT outsourcing and the business process outsourcing of the 80s and the 90s, right? Because then that was just internet cable with people with terminals dialing into the US. And this is like, you could do the work anywhere. I have one last question, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience. We did mention that you were also in charge of the security portfolio within Cisco. Talk a little bit, and of course, I mean, everything from Kaseya to, it's like I've learned more words in the last few months about all of these different companies that are the ransomware, and my own healthcare organization was hit by it. So curious to hear your take on security.
Yeah, look, security, I think if you were to think about, I am very lucky, because I don't think there's too many people in the world that have a job like I do. And I'm very lucky for it and very grateful, because think about the 2 problems I'm trying to solve. I'm trying to make sure that people stay connected to each other and collaborate with each other and participate in the global economy, regardless of where they are. And I'm trying to keep them safe and secure from the bad people. And those are like, it doesn't get any more meta than that. So like, we're very lucky to be in these 2 businesses at scale, where they're multi-billion-dollar businesses, both of them. On the security side, the big challenge that we have is security is a very fractioned market. So there's about 3,500 providers in security. There's $125 billion of TAM, and literally no one owns more than 5% of the market. So when you start thinking about security as an industry, there's a huge amount of fractioning, and the complexity is super high. And what ends up happening is complexity drives, by definition, low efficacy in security. And increasing efficacy is the sole goal of security. So there's this tremendous opportunity to say, can you reduce the friction for the user and make sure that the users don't find security intimidating. And when you do that, you will automatically increase the efficacy of security. And I'll give you an example. We have a product called Duo, and Duo is a multi-factor.
No, we use it at the university, but my audience may not know what it is.
Yeah, and so for those that don't know, like that's product that really fundamentally reimagines access control. And if you want to do multi-factor authentication for your corporate applications, Duo can be used. But we just launched a capability called Passwordless, and Passwordless basically uses your biometrics on your device, so that you can make sure that you don't have to keep typing in your password every single time you could log into a corporate application. Now that is way lower on the friction quotient, right? Because you reduce your friction quite a bit. But guess what? It's also much higher on the efficacy quotient on security, because you don't use a password all the time and you use your fingerprint or your Face ID or retinal scan or whatever it might be. What that allows you to do is prevent someone from intercepting your keystrokes, prevent someone from looking over your shoulder and seeing what password you're typing in. And so you got more secure while it became less painful to use it. And so what we're trying to do is do many, many more of those kind of innovations that reduce the friction, increase the efficacy, simplify security in general, and make sure that you don't have to go to 3,500 providers to go out and do things, but that we can actually consolidate it down to a few. And there's a huge advantage in doing that, because in every product that we do, we actually think about security being kind of embedded in there, in addition to selling security products as standalone products. So if you think about WebEx, it's the most secure platform. If you think about, Meraki, which is our kind of, network routing and, switching kind of gear, that's a very, very secure platform, because SD-WAN, which is the technology that you have there, is tied to our security stack. So there's going to be a lot of, emphasis on security in Cisco. And I would say that it is one of the fastest growing businesses we have today. But in 10 years, when you look at security, it will be, it will be one of the largest businesses that I think Cisco will have, because it's so important for what needs to be done.
Yep. Well, let's go to the audience now. We have a lot of questions stacked up. So I'm going to start with sort of one that Michael LaFontaine has asked, which is, what happens to the informal, unintentional human, the standard water cooler approach? Like, what happens when you get away from the bumping into the hallway? It doesn't happen in a remote environment. Is there lost collaboration, knowledge sharing?
That's a really good question. Thank you for asking that, Michael. The way that we see it is that serendipity, when you lose that, you actually. So what have we done really well so far in the past 16 months? We've actually done well as a society in handling planned communications virtually really well. Okay, I scheduled a meeting with Vijay. It was at 5:30 p.m. and I knew to log in and make sure that I can actually, get on this call with you. What is not done as well is, when you're sitting in an office, presence is known at so many different levels. I know if you're wearing your headphones and typing that you're busy. I know that you're there, so you're available, that you're in the office physically. I can go up and talk to you. All of those things have to actually get translated. But I think when you do it digitally, you can do it at scale. So I'll give you an example. Right now at Cisco, we have 75,000 employees, like I said. At any given point in time with WebEx, when we use it, I know every employee and what their presence is at any given point in time. I know if my boss Chuck is available and he's willing to take a call, and I can just click one button and I can have him show up on video. I don't have to schedule a meeting. I know if someone is on a call. I know if someone has marked themselves as busy. I know if someone has said, I'm going to be off on vacation. I'm going to take some time off. All of those are statuses that show up on your presence page. And so the first thing we're doing is doing a lot of work on presence, which we now have completely unified across calling, messaging, meetings, polling, Q&A, all of that stuff. But the second thing we're doing is making sure that we can actually have spontaneous communication with each other. So I can just click on a button and get that. And the third thing we're doing over there on the innovation side is not everything has to be synchronous. There's a lot of room for asynchronous communication, and we need to make sure that we actually open that up. And so as you move forward, spontaneity will actually be a very important part. And then the other thing, which is cultural, I think, which we need to get more used to, is incorporate some wander time in meetings. You don't have to have a meeting where there's 3 minutes, 3 seconds of silence and everyone's like, all right, are we done? Let's move on. Because the creativity doesn't come from a structured agenda all the time. It comes because you allow yourselves to wander a bit and make sure that you're there just hanging out. And those are the pieces that we're actually building into the product.
A question from Bassam Fawaz, which I think is really interesting. What will organization culture mean in this digital age that you describe? Like, we talk about culture, but what is it in this sort of new organization?
Yeah, I think one of the things we say is as we move to the hybrid world, there'll be 3 dimensions that you'll have to think about. One is the technology dimension. The second is a culture dimension. Third one is a leadership dimension. And leadership will drive culture to some degree. But, if you think about not making people feel guilty when they're not physically present somewhere is going to be a really important aspect of culture that you have to embrace. Making sure that people feel engaged. You were actually talking about, how do you make sure that the introverts can talk? One of the technologies that we acquired, that we incorporated into WebEx, was a product called Slido. And what we do over there is literally just make sure that we can, in the middle of a meeting, pause and ask people questions. What do you think about this idea? Give us your sentiment on it, or stack rank these 5 ideas and tell us which one is the best to worst. Mm-hmm. Or here's a multiple choice, pick one of these 3 that are going to be important. Those are all kind of polls you can incorporate in the middle. So the goal over there is, culturally, you want to make sure that everyone has a voice, even when they're not talking. Everyone feels like they're part of a conversation.
Yep.
And engaged in a dialogue rather than being lectured to. And I think that's going to be pretty important to go through. And I feel like that's going to be a huge cultural shift. The other thing I'd say is, culturally, you are going to want to make sure that you're you keep in mind the well-being of the people around you and inclusivity of those few folks, so that no one feels like they're being, kind of bulldozed over. I think that softness will need to come into these dynamics, and it'll just make for a better workplace.
Yeah, in fact, Cynthia Root, who heads our career offices, has exactly that question for you, which is, how does the lens of personality trait play into this? Because what she's basically saying is, do we need EQ training or soft skills training that sort of helps employees become more open, agile, empathetic within this work format? And I think your answer is, we need to think harder about that, but I'll let you answer it.
We need to think harder about that for sure, but then the system can also help you. So for example, I now know, when I use WebEx, how many meetings have I spoken in, how many meetings have I not spoken in? I have that data. And that data can actually help me in saying, okay, I'm actually not talking enough in these meetings, and maybe I should actually express my opinion. I have, like I mentioned, that roundtable feature is one where we can actually ask people to, participate. That's another feature. You can have ways that you can make sure that you can engage others in the midst of a conversation by surveys and pauses and polls, so that you can engage the audience. Those are all kind of aspects where, yes, there is an aspect of EQ that is going to be super important that we actually coach people on. But there's also an aspect of a reminder and a nudge that can be provided. It says, literally, Jeetu, you've been talking nonstop now for 75 of the past 80 minutes. And maybe you want to just take a pause and let other people kind of weigh in.
No, I think, you said something which I think generically, the concept is really powerful. Mm-hmm. Because when you go to a face-to-face meeting in whatever you want, I don't know the right phrase, in real life, in person, there's no data. Nobody's telling you who spoke. We know in our heads, okay, that guy talks too much, whatever, but there's no insight. And, some people are aware, other people are less aware. So I think, this happened in our school too, because we now record every lecture. And we also know when people go back and replay a part of my lecture, it's like, okay, 15 people out of 30 rewatched those 5 minutes. Yeah. And so I know, I did not do a good job explaining that concept. But then I had to tell the tech guys, okay, you're so proud of this feature, except you haven't told any of our faculty that we have this feature. But I do think the feedback loop is really important. because people aren't, I mean, even if you think you're self-aware, there's a lot of data that you may not actually spot because it's all happening fast in real time. You're interacting, you're excited, whatever the case might be. And there's so many different, Microsoft tells me when I should have private time, focus time, whatever. And initially I was a little skeptical, but it actually often sort of is able to analyze my work patterns, but that's all me working by myself. It's not, and in meetings, but when you see people, how they actually interact, I mean, there's a lot of data that I had not thought about until 2 minutes ago.
Yeah, there is a lot of data. The thing that's interesting is you have to make sure that the company that's building those analytics are not doing it from the lens of inspection. They're doing it from a lens of enablement.
Yep.
And in fact, most of these pieces of data that are given to managers to see if their employees are working. And the reality is you want to give it to the employees to see if they can actually do better, but not give it to the manager to say this is what's happening. Like that there's a level of, and then for the teams, you have a different set of data. And for org, you might have a different set of data, but don't give orgs individuals data, give orgs a pattern, and then give the individuals their own data, and you'll actually find a very different outcome.
I've got a couple of simple technical questions that I'll go to, and I'll go to some high up level. So Sachin Kakre, who's the CIO at Bourne's, asked, what's the percentage of your clients, customers who are working from home, hybrid, coming back to on-site? You gave that statistics earlier, I believe, but what were those again?
Yeah, so the percentage of our employees was different from our clients. The percentage of our employees that were actually going to be, that were working from the office 3 to 5 days a week prior to COVID was 63%.
Mm-hmm.
And moving forward, we think 77% will be working away from the office. So only 33% or 23% will be working from, from the office 3 to 5 days a week. That's different from what every client of ours might have in different industries. And different industries will have different stats over there. But what we do know is that virtually every customer, leaving aside a few, over 90%, will in some way or form embrace a hybrid work pattern. And the reason I say that is because it's going to be driven by the employees, not the employer. If you don't, as an employer, support a hybrid work pattern, over time, employees won't want to go out and work at that place. And so you have to make sure that you accommodate for the flexibility that they're asking for.
Yep.
And I don't think I know of too many people. I know a lot of people that say, I'm ready to get back into the office and meet people socially, and I'm really excited to do that. What I don't know is anyone saying, I'm going to go back 5 days a week, exactly the way it used to be before COVID, and that's how I'm going to operate. Like, there's a lot of people that are like, no, I want some flexibility. I'm a single parent, and I want to pick up my child from daycare at 2 PM, and I should not have to give up my ambition to make that happen.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of things I think we have to be mindful of as that happens.
A question from Laura Lute. How are you coaching managers to handle focus time, deep thinking time versus collaborative times? Like, and when if they need to be in the office? This was sort of the problem I was facing just designing our organization's work, but best practices, good practices?
Yeah, I think the best practice, and look, this is a struggle for all of us, right? So by no means am I saying that we've cracked the code on this, but the best practice that we've at least seen is the intrinsic recognition that people need to have that focus time is actually good. And for you to think about a topic deeply enough and having time to think about a topic is better than you just being in back-to-back meetings. There's an illusion of being busy, being productive, and being busy the same as being productive. And that is not the case. Being busy is not being productive. And so we try to actually at least make sure from a management philosophy perspective, do that. Now, by the way, as any company, Cisco can do better in making sure that we actually do less meetings and more thinking time. But what we're doing is providing individuals tools and saying, here's what you have said you want as focus time, and here's how you're faring against your goals that you have set yourself. And so do you want to try harder next week?
Yep.
The goal over here is it's just like working out. I want to work out 7 days a week. Do I get to work out 7 days a week? I don't. But if I can work out 3 days a week, that's better than 7. I mean, that's better than none, right? And so what I would love to do is make sure that people constantly keep getting telemetry on how they're doing so that they can improve the next week a little bit. And if you can keep improving a little bit, that's how muscle memory gets built, rather than thinking it's all or nothing. You might have a bad week. That's okay. It's the end of the quarter. You're having a lot of meetings. That's a bad week. Maybe the next week you actually go out and compensate for it and get some more think time. So for example, this week is our last week of the fiscal year for us. And so we have a very, very busy week this week. Next week, I'm taking the week off, and I'm going to actually just do a lot of thinking during that week. And I have a lot of papers that people have given me that I'm going to be reading, and I'm just going to have a think week. And then the week after, I'm going to go take time with the family. But that week that I'm off is not so that I don't talk to anyone. It's so that I can do some deep thinking time. So I'm not accepting any meetings. I'm not going out and doing any recurring meetings. That's not going to happen next week. This week, I don't have any think time. I don't have any focus time. I'm just going meeting to meeting to meeting because last week of the quarter, we got to make sure that we have a great quarter.
Yeah, at some level, I think the best you can do is make people aware of how they partition their time.
That's right.
And there's actually a lot of research about sort of when's the best time to be focused thinking, because different people operate differently. Some people are creative in the morning, things like that. It's really sort of challenging, and I think because there's no downtime between meetings in Zoom, because there's no time to walk anywhere. It's like you can literally go in 3 seconds from one meeting to the next. It has put a premium on sort of this think and focus time. And I think what he's really saying is we all need to be very conscious about. It's actually, since you have the Peloton in the back, if you're, we talked about it earlier, there's lessons there, in my opinion. My team's always teasing me about how much I love my Peloton, which is true, but they nudge you. You're missing this week altogether. Like, you've got a 45-week streak. Are you sure you don't want to work out? Like somehow in my fatigue, I find a way to, get another workout in. And there's data. And I think all of these things, there's so much of a feedback loop that we've never had before. I keep checking my health app to figure out what's my recovery time now? Like I didn't even care about these things, before I got all of these devices. Sort of a slightly different question. What do you think is going to be the future of office space? Joel Manfredo is referring to some of the work Cisco did in the past on the future of work, but do you see a change in the way we can, we source and configure our workspaces?
So I'm actually very fortunate in this because I have the unique perspective to be sitting on the board of Jones Lang LaSalle, which is one of the largest commercial real estate companies, JLL. And then I also sit on, I run the collaboration business at Cisco. And so there are two businesses that are very complementary. And I think office space is going to have some very interesting changes that as you move forward, because if you for a moment believe that a few facts like we talked about, 77% of the people will spend a large percentage of the time outside the office, but they still want to go into the office, and 98% of the meetings that happen will have at least one participant that's not in the office. The way that your facilities get structured and configured will be very different. So I'll give you a few examples. It's going to really matter on how many people have dedicated desks versus what percentage of the real estate square footage goes into collaboration rooms and huddle spaces. Because people might go into the office wanting to do more collaboration, and people might want to work from home and they want quiet time and they just want to crank. And so giving everyone an individual cubicle or a desk or an office might not make sense. You might want to go out and have the concept of hot desking. That's far more prominent. And so we're working on that to provide technology to make sure that we can help with hot desking. There might be aspects like, what do you do for, with sensors in the office? One of the things that we've done is, what's the temperature in a room? What's the temperature in a floor? What's the temperature in a building? What's the occupancy in a room, occupancy in a floor, occupancy in a building? All of those kind of sensors. What's the ambient noise in a room? All of these will be things that can be detected through sensors, and then you can actually take action based on them. So for example, we have this capability today. If you go into a Cisco conference room, and the conference room is designed for 4 people, but there's 7 people that show up, the conference room will immediately remind you, the system, you have 7 people, you have exceeded the social distancing guidelines in this room. Do you want to go ahead and help me find you a room that can accommodate 7 people? And if so, here's a map. And all you have to do is voice activate, say, yes, go ahead and reserve the room. It'll show you a map so that you can go there. That's an example of what we're doing for, facilities. But I think that facilities, the way I see this happening is IT, HR, and facilities will actually work together along with the business to make sure that they think about how they're going to rethink the work future, because it's there are nuances that have to be kept in mind.
It reminds me of a completely different domain, which is Disney. And there's everybody talks about digital strategy being like, what do you stream, and Disney Plus or Netflix and Amazon Prime. But I think a piece of this story that people miss is the complementary aspects. And Disney was very clever about the movies that they made for the big screen, saying you're only going to go to the theater and spend $100 for your family if the movie is a big movie that you want to actually share with your friends, share the experience. But if it's an independent movie, you're probably not going to spend $100 going to it. So those will be watched at home. Yeah. So all these complementary decisions, like what movies do you make, and are part of the equation. And I see a huge analogy between what you just described, which is sort of how we work. So, and I think about that too, because all of us, even as faculty members, when we go to the office, if we want to collaborate, we have our doors open. But if you want to work on private research, you close your door. Or now you work from home. Yeah. And so the offices will be used completely differently. Nobody's going to few will want to go to the office to actually sort of do their own creative work or their own focus.
And the other thing that will be interesting is hardware and software experiences will fuse together. Yeah. And so I think, like, for example, I have right now, and I can show this to you, I chose to do it from here so I could show it to you, but if you see that's a 27-inch screen that I have in my office that essentially allows me to sit back, listen to surround sound, and I can actually say, join the meeting.
Okay.
And those kind of hardware experiences getting fused with the software will be very, very important. And so I do think that that'll have, and by the way, in real estate and facilities, that'll be important. And the other thing that we are seeing a huge amount of thing that's happening is how our home office is going to get configured as well.
Yeah.
So that, and our company is going to make sure that they actually take a more active role in helping employees configure home offices over time. And we believe that there's an opportunity over there that'll be pretty profound.
It just takes one bad score on Room Rater for people to rethink that I've got a green screen behind me and lighting and God knows what else, none of which I had 18 months ago. With that, let me thank Jeetu, but before I let all of you go, I just have a few sort of things. So first, I want to thank KPMG, our sponsor, and Kalpana Ramakrishnan in particular, who is our specific sponsor, because she makes it possible for us to offer such talented speakers as Jeetu at no cost to you. And so again, thank you, KPMG. Jeetu touched on something that I thought was very important about the opportunity around technology. And obviously at the business school and at my center, we have sort of embraced this and understood that we need to do more. We all need to step up to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion, specifically in the tech workplace. As many of you know, we have a new dean, Dean Ian Williamson. So he is an HR expert and is very, very sort of familiar with sort of DEI practices. And he's going to be in a conversation with me and Rashmi Kumar, who is the CIO of HP Enterprise, who is also very active in this space. So, the focus is really about creating opportunity for as many people as we can. And I every day feel privileged that at the University of California, we are doing our part to lift sort of the people of California and hopefully the world. And so that is on September 7th. On October 7th, we're going to pivot a little bit. We're going to talk to one of the foremost experts on IT and productivity. His name is Eric Brynjolfsson. He was at MIT and head of the Digital Economy Lab Digital Economy Initiative for many years. He's now the head of the Digital Economy Lab at Stanford, a good friend of mine. So that's October 7th, 5:30 to 6:30 always. Please calendar those events. Again, thank you, Jeetu, very much for those insightful comments. Thank you for joining us.
Can I make one comment, Vijay, to your audience?
Sure.
It's important to have this about, as we think about inclusivity, I think, my message to folks is real men aren't threatened by strong women. And we need more women in tech. And this is a particularly dear topic to me. But if there's, the heavy lifting has to be done. The reason that there is a divide right now is because people with diverse backgrounds, whether it be ethnic backgrounds or gender, are not let in because of the majority that are there. So it is actually the job of the majority to make sure that they create a comfortable environment. And so that would be my message, is make sure that if you folks are running teams, or if you ever get into a workplace where you're going to run teams, that you try to create more of a representative model of what the world looks like, not something that's overly dominated in one area or the other.
Yeah, with that, any other closing thoughts about the future of work?
I think this is an exciting time. This has been a tough 15, 16 months for all of us. There's a lot of people that I've lost some family in this during this time as well. But I will say this, that, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about all that we can do. And we have to be, extremely mindful of the fact that if we could get through the past 15 months, and during that time, create a vaccine and vaccinate hundreds of millions of people, there's a lot to be optimistic about all the things that we're going to be able to do. And, whatever you do, keep innovating and making sure that in whatever field you're in, innovation is actually what gets us ahead. So,
with that, let's leave on an optimistic note. And I'll just sort of echo what Jeetu said, because if you pay attention to the vaccine story, nobody thought that a vaccine would be ready in 10 months. By the way, the record for a vaccine is 4 years and was mumps. And that was God knows how many years ago. And the average time to a vaccine is 20 plus years. And this is very much a software driven story. So, think about living through the pandemic without Netflix, without Amazon, without delivery at home of pretty much anything that you want. But I too am optimistic. And I think we're in the early innings of a world of far more opportunity. So on that note, thank you all for attending. Thank you very much again, Jeetu. And let's look forward to staying in touch. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.